Hey everybody, Mr. Stafford here. Today we are going to talk about George Washington's first term as president. I'm going to do this as a series of two videos. We're going to break it down because there's distinct issues in his first term and we kind of shift gears in his second term. We're going to deal with domestic policy in his first term and largely foreign policy in his second term. So let's get to it. Washington's first term. All right. So to start with, there's some unfinished business, right? We need to figure out exactly what this new government is going to look like and how it's going to work. We've got the Constitution. Finally, all 13 states have ratified it. But what is it going to look like in practice? And so Washington and his advisors are really going to set the tone for the next 200 years, really, of precedent of what it looks like in practice. The debates that we're having today, they were having back then. So this first term, he's going to be dealing with the unfinished business of the Bill of Rights, of adding these guaranteed protections to the Constitution that the Anti-Federalists had demanded, right? You should be familiar with the Bill of Rights. If not, go take a look at them. It's important, right? These are your rights. So once the Bill of Rights is added, Anti-Federalists are on board. We are going to see that Washington will be elected as our first president. Washington being elected largely because people loved him, right? He was like a rock star, a celebrity. People loved him. The elites loved him. The common people loved him. They believed him to be a man of integrity, a man of character, a man of his word, and they trusted him in this new position. Right? They were fearful of government, but they trusted Washington. He was elected unanimously by the Electoral College. In fact, I think a lot of the framers at the time suspected that that's how the Electoral College would work. Somebody would rise up and it would be clear that that person would be the successor to the previous president. It's not obviously how it worked, but that was the thinking at the time. He's going to immediately create a cabinet of advisors. He's going to pick his most trusted, and it's not about getting people who agree with him, but people that he's going to trust their ability to give him some good input and good thought. He's going to choose people really with very different ideas. And really, when we look at this first term, a lot of people would call it Hamilton's first term of his presidency because Hamilton is so influential. But if you're a Hamilton fan, this is the Cabinet Battle 1 term. Right? So we're going to talk a lot about the stuff that comes up in Cabinet Battle 1. If you're not a Hamilton fan, maybe we'll listen to it or watch it in class because it does a good job of summing up some of these things. So the cabinet, what is the cabinet? You've got Jefferson as the Secretary of State. He's going to advise Washington on policies of state, like how do we relate with other countries, foreign policy, that kind of stuff. Department of Treasury is Hamilton, dealing with economic policies. And Department of War, today it's our Department of Defense, would be Knox, and he's going to advise the president on defense matters. All right, let's get to Hamilton, because Hamilton's really driving the conversation in this first term of President George Washington. Hamilton wants to secure a solid footing for this new American economy, and he's got a plan for it. So what is his plan?
The issue on the table. Secretary Hamilton's plan to assume state debt and establish a national bank.
Well, he wants to fix the weaknesses of the current American economy after the American Revolution. There had been turmoil. There's a lot of debt. There's not a unified economy. Hamilton wants to fix it. How is he going to do that? Well, he proposes a couple of things. Number one, he proposes at-par funding. What does that mean? Well, that means that we are going to pay back, we as the United States of America are going to pay back any debts that we owe in full. There were people who were thinking we weren't going to be able to pay it back. We didn't have any money, right? When you loan somebody money and they lose everything, at some point you think, I'm not getting my money back, right? A lot of people were feeling that way about money that they had given to the revolutionary cause. In fact, some had sold their debt. They had, let's say, loaned $100 in the interest of supporting the American Revolution and gotten a bond that they were going to get paid back. Now you've got people that are selling those for a fraction of the price. People are buying those up, right? So that's going to add a layer of controversy because now the people who had bought up all of that debt are going to get paid in full. And the people who had actually loaned the money a lot of times were only getting a fraction of what they had loaned back. So that's at-par funding, a guarantee that we're going to pay back at face value the debt that the country owes. Now, why would you do that? Hamilton says it's essential to establish credit. If you don't pay people the money you owe them, they will not loan you money in the future. So this is a lesson to the entire country that if you loan the country money, we're good for it. Okay. The next thing is assumption of state debts. So if the state had owed people money, now the federal government is going to owe people money. And that's going to shift the burden from the state to the national level. And the national government is going to be responsible for paying that money back. Now, why would the national government want to do that, especially when they don't have any money? Well, Hamilton's going to argue, number one, it's going to alleviate that debt from the states. Number two, It's going to make sure that that loyalty is to the federal government rather than the state governments. People are going to be rooting for the success of the federal government. And that's important to him, right? The balance of power, he wants to shift it from that, and loyalty shift from the states to the federal government. He's going to see the national debt as a national blessing. It's a good thing if the federal government, if the national government owes people money. He's going to think should be limited, right? He would probably freak out if he saw today's debt. But if people are owed money by the federal government, they're going to root for the federal government to be successful. They're going to cheer for its victories because that means they're getting paid, right? So that's an important consequence that Hamilton is expecting from his policies of at-par funding and assumption. All right, so where's the money come from? It's a lot of money, right? So where is it going to come from? He's got two main ways he thinks we ought to raise that money. Number one, customs duties, tariffs, taxing imports. He likes this idea, and he thinks that the country's going to like this idea. Even though it's going to make imports more expensive, it's going to raise money for the national government. And number two, it's going to protect American industry. It's going to make those foreign competitors a little less competitive, right? So number one would be tariffs. Number two, an excise tax. Specifically, he's going to say on whiskey, right? You don't need whiskey to survive. It's a luxury item. So let's tax it. He proposes about 7 cents per gallon. Now, he might think that whiskey is a luxury, but in a lot of places in the country, whiskey is a currency. It's one of the few things that you can take and trade for just about anything. So this is going to really feel like an income tax to a lot of people.
When Britain taxed our tea, we got frisky. Imagine what's going to happen when you try to tax our whiskey.
It's going to lead to a rebellion that Washington will squash with this new American army called the Whiskey Rebellion. You hear more about that later. All right. The last thing that I want to talk about that Hamilton favored was a national bank, a U.S. bank, someone to organize the finances of the United States. He thinks it's absolutely necessary, and it should be modeled on the Bank of England. This is going to get Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans, which are his political party, really upset, right? They're going to be really opposed to the bank. They think it's too aristocratic, too much like England, and we shouldn't even go there. They think it's going to only benefit one section of the country, namely that New England region, right, where all those financial interests are. It's only going to make them richer and in more control of the country's finances. He also is going to argue, Jefferson that is that it is unconstitutional. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the government can create a bank. Yet here is Hamilton proposing that they do just that. So what does Hamilton say in response? Hamilton is going to respond at the request of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, by saying, number one, it is constitutional. The Constitution does not say that Congress can create a bank, but it does give Congress all sorts of authority over monetary and fiscal policy, right? And then it says, the Constitution, that Congress can do anything that is necessary and proper to carrying out those those aforementioned duties, right? So there's this list of things that Congress can do, and they can do anything they need to do to make those things happen. And that's what Hamilton says allows Congress to create a bank. He's going to take what we call a loose interpretation of the Constitution, right? He's going to argue that there are implied powers. This is not just you can do what the Constitution says. It's you can do anything the Constitution implies that you can do. Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans are really going to take issue with that. They're going to argue that the Constitution should be interpreted strictly. The government can only do what the Constitution says it can do. All right? So this is foreshadowing the political parties that will emerge, that you will be reading about in this chapter, that you will be hearing about in future lectures. So we're going to stop here. We're going to move to Washington's second term next. So next, watch the lecture video on George Washington's second term as president. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We fought for these ideals, we shouldn't settle for less. These are wise words, enterprising men quote them. Don't act surprised, you guys, cause I wrote them.